And after that lecture, we're already back. We will now devote ourselves to the scene design, and that means we want to model a small McDonald's-like room. I think the ceilings in the McDonald's are about 4 meters high, so let's just press 2 because our cube has a height of 2 meters by default, and then we'll make our McDonald's a bit wider and a bit longer. So we press S, Shift Z, and simply delete the back, and now we have our table here, which is of course way too low to the ground. But we can fix that. We're going to press G and Z, and then we move the whole thing up. We forgot something. Apparently our Bezier circle is still in there under the C, so I forgot to delete it the whole time. I could have deleted it a long time ago. Now, let's get rid of that. Alright, now let's go to the scene now anyway, and we're going to look at the inside of our McDonald's. Now, in the interior design, we also want to look at the camera setup. We want to think about the perspective from which we want our camera to look. Now, I guess first of all, we don't want our cup to be so close to the front of the table. I mean, the edge of the table just doesn't look that nice. Now, this is a simple trick. We'll just push our mug a little further to the back. There we go. Now, we have our chamber at this angle, I think, and if we want to align our chamber to this view, we can already go to View at the top, and then we go to Align View, and then say Align Active Camera to View. Now, if you have the numpad, you could also press Alt Command and then the numpad 0, and we got it covered. Now, if you then go to the camera view, you can press G again, and then you can still move or rotate the camera, whatever. Anyway, this is our camera setup now, and I think this looks pretty nice. We can also scale the camera down, and the scale of the camera actually makes no difference, really. Unless you scale the camera negatively, then logically it does make a difference. But if I now, for example, put the camera on our stage and say S-1, so flip it in the other direction, it works again. Okay, a very important parameter for the camera is the so-called focal length. You can set them here in the camera settings. So you first have to go to the object data properties below, and in this case, the camera. And of course, you have to have the selected camera beforehand. Logical. And with interior shots, you usually want a focal length of about 20 to 25 millimeters. I can enter 25 there, and this is actually the standard for interior shots. What does an extremely high focal length remind you of? Can I give you a little food for thought? These are like telephoto lenses, you know, the one people use to film animals for about 2 kilometers away? Yeah, those ones. And we can even animate the focal length. I can show you this very briefly. For example, if I want to do a dolly zoom here, if you don't know what a dolly zoom is, you will know after this. And for this, we create a keyframe for the location of the camera right now. And here we switch from global to view to frame 80 or something like that. We move the camera back a few meters, G, Z, bang, insert location. And now let's go back to our first keyframe. So C for now, our camera moves backwards. That's nice. And that's where we want our focal length to be exactly so that the cup stays that way. That means we're going over the focal length with the mouse at frame 1. We press I to insert a keyframe, and then at frame 80, we set the correct value here with the mouse again, and we press I again. And now we created a very simple and accurate dolly zoom, which is used a lot in horror movies. The camera moves backwards, and at the same time, the focal length is screwed up in such a way that the movement is equalized as much as possible. We've actually managed to do that relatively well. You can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move around a little bit, like with left and right, you move between frames, and with up and down, you move between keyframes. You can also play around with this, for example, by pulling the camera back and making sure that the object stays in the exact same place, and that looks like this. But that is just all small fun facts. We want to make sure that the rest of the scene is finished, so to speak. So we close the window and we click on this bridge point up here, and then hope everything works. In fact, this is still a difficult thing in Blender, even for professionals. And I don't mean to say that I'm a professional, but even professionals have this problem. That's what I meant. Okay, now we're going to work on bringing some photorealism into our scene, and I would like to suggest the Archimesh add-on. Now we're going to do Command comma, and we open the settings and we go to add-ons and enable the Archimesh add-on. With the Archimesh add-on, you have the possibility to create windows for your scene very quickly. That's exactly what we want to do right now, because our McDonald's currently doesn't let any light in from the outside. I mean, there's no windows. So we want to make a glass front wall, so to speak. Let's move our cursor somewhere in the middle of this wall below, and now we select this edge, we press Shift S and 2, and already our cursor is exactly in the middle. Now, if we have the Archimesh add-on enabled, then we can see here now, if we press Shift A, we have our menu like normal, that you can normally add stuff, and we can now see the Archimesh option in here, and we can select a rail window. And now you will see we already have the first window installed. However, it's important now that you don't get the idea that you can just scale or move this, because this is not how this add-on works. We're going to be deleting this side of the wall first. So we go into edit mode and we delete the face, then we press N to open the side panel. And if you then actually select the window, we can now set everything that you want right here. First of all, the rotation, because we're often at 90 degrees. That means the rotation should be 90 degrees here. Now let's just get that done. And then the question is whether we want a windowsill, and no, we do not want a windowsill. So we uncheck the windowsill option, and there we go. And now we can basically change everything about the window that we want. There's window size settings, for example, but if you want to move your entire window, then instead of selecting the window, you select the empty, which is this cross right here, and then press G and move the whole thing as one object. And if we now go into the camera view, we can see our wall has become a window, and now we press N again and go into the render. And the newest thing is that light is actually coming in from the outside through the window, so that that's sort of the absolute basis for photorealism. Basically, it's about light coming in from the outside and shadows being cast by walls, by all the objects in the room. That is all that photorealism is about first and foremost when it comes to exposure. Okay, so say you're not satisfied with the window and you want to delete the whole thing. It's not enough to just select the empty, press X and delete. No, that means you gotta select the empty, you gotta select everything else, and then you press X and delete it, and then everything is gone. You know what? I changed my mind. We don't want a rail window at all. We want a panel window. Why? Because this gives us the option to set multiple window bars, but here too, roughly the same setting options apply as I told you before. Okay, let's remove the windowsill again, and now you see we have an empty with which we can move our entire object once again. We also have a rotation value, and I just noticed that 90 degrees doesn't make any sense. It should be more like 270. And also, that's an interesting case. Why the hell is it that 270 degrees is so frowned upon? I mean, everyone knows 90 degrees, everyone knows 180, everyone knows 360, but 270? No idea. And once again, we have all the settings options. For example, you can choose the top here, so you can set it into an arch, or you can make an incline or a decline, and you can set up the angle for that as well. You could even make a triangle out of it here, and then we have all the sliders here for setting the width of the 3 windows and also the height of the 3 windows. The height of the window is currently 190. Unfortunately, it only works up to 300. That's just the limit of the algorithm. One problem here is that everything is basically scaled relatively, so the moment you try to make it bigger like this, for example, it just snaps right into place again, and that's kind of annoying, so we have to approach this in a different way. However, we can just add a few windows here by clicking the buttons here. Let's say we go for a horizontal count of about 5. And you can also see a few tick boxes are added down here, which apply border thickening. This is something we really don't want, but it's there if you need it. And now we still have settings options for different frames and materials, because the Archimesh actually comes with its own materials. So if we go to the render view, then we already have a really large glass material directly on it. That's kind of cool. And now if we move the empty a little bit again, the axis will scale accordingly, just as I told before. We'll scale the whole thing up a bit, and then we have our window for our friendly, light-flooded McDonald's, so to speak. And that is immediately very realistic, because the human eye immediately notices it. And this means we can now close the backside again. So we select the edges of the backside, we press F to fill, and you know, we can add a small counter, a model, whatnot. But honestly, the other thing that we want to focus on now is the camera. Right now, we don't have to put too much effort into making this whole McDonald's restaurant. And at the same time, we want to promote the realism of our scene. So we have a function in the camera called depth of field, which I can enable right here. Now I can use the eyedropper tool to select an object that I want to be in focus, and then I go down with the f-stop and I can set the depth of field manually. So like I said, it's like 2 birds with 1 stone right now. It saves us a lot of time modeling all the individual elements of a McDonald's restaurant, but also it is just more realistic because this is how the human eye works. When we focus on a thing, the rest becomes blurry. So depth of field is a killer strategy, and it can really increase the photorealism of your scene. Now you can see that the focus is not exactly on the top of the cup, but if you want to focus on a very specific point, I can tell you a little trick. In this case, we want our focus to be right about here on this point. So we press Shift S2, move our cursor over here, then press Shift A, and then we create an empty. Doesn't matter which one you pick, really doesn't matter. Now let's call it focus point, and then we set our focus point in the camera as a focus object. And now you can see that the camera is literally focusing on that thing and nothing else. Now the f-stop you see at 1.2 is completely utopian, so we should definitely keep it above 2.5. Let's say 2.8 is still within regular limits. I think that's a standard. And with that, we got a lot out of the camera. So now you know how to make a window, now you know how to work with light within a room, but now we're going to be looking into some interior modeling, so I'm excited to take you to the next lecture. Let's go!